Hello everyone and welcome to episode 6 of Let's Play Low Poly Modeling myself. I am Valentino and today we are going to be talking about the art pipeline. So, what is the art pipeline? Well, as you can see, it's where we take concept and turn it into a final product that's going to appear in our games. And so far, you've seen me work on that. We've made the model, where we took our concept, me, and we fleshed it out into a usable, game-ready, low-poly model, and we've unwrapped it. But what are the other areas? Well, we've talked about texturing, which we're going to do after UV. And I'm going to do a rigging video, so that must be in there somewhere. And the entire purpose of rigging is so we can animate. So that must be the art pipeline, right? Well, yes, that can be an art pipeline, but it's really inefficient. Now, if you only have one artist from start to finish working on and completely owning a model, that's really inefficient, and it's not, honestly, very good use of your resources. You might have an artist who's amazingly good at rigging and animating, and it'd probably be better if you just had him do, or her, do all of those aspects of your art pipeline. Especially if you're a small team. I mean, why waste time having that guy model if he's not too good at it? But if he's your best animator, why waste him? So, how can we change this up, and why is each part important? Well, let's go over it real quick. Concepting. We generally know what this is, right? This is where all those wonderful art books from all those production teams come from. And if you're unaware, this is where an executive or high-level player in your company comes up to a small, feeble artist who's probably a little bit shy but is a fantastic painter, and he gets handed a napkin that says, "Make a badass snake." And the snake looks like this. And then they're told, by the way, he's going to fight a man with a flaming sword. And, well, your concept artist is going to be making something that looks fantastically beautiful and represents that idea. After about 2 hours, where you get a fantastically well-painted Photoshop PSD, your actual 3D artist will look at that concept, think about it, gather reference, like shown in the other videos, and flesh out a model. And throughout this entire process, you're going to have an art lead or a production team member continuously check in and update and make sure everything's on task. Because making art for games is a massive collaborative process, and you want to make sure everyone's on the right tab. After the model is completed, we of course want to unwrap it. And unwrapping is, of course, just getting everything ready for the texture. Texturing, of course, is applying color, specularity, normal maps, if of course you have a high poly model to do it, details, emissive maps, really anything. And rigging, of course, is giving bones to your character so it can be animated. And animation, of course, is making the movement cycles for games. So, let's look at these. Let's say you want to make an efficient as possible art pipeline. Or at least, a more efficient one. Because sometimes things don't work out this way from having one person own a model completely. Actually, very rarely does it happen that way. And if you're an independent game developer and you have a small sum of money and you're hiring contract artists and technical artists and animators, you need to know exactly which things can be done at the same time with the exact same model. And hopefully I'll enlighten you on a few of those things. First up, rigging. Rigging doesn't require a texture. Rigging doesn't require UVs. It just requires a model. animation. Now, animation requires rigging. That's all. You could rig with just a skeleton. I mean, it'd be difficult because you wouldn't have an idea of what the model looks like. But if you are moving really quickly, that's all it requires. So, your pipeline could generally look like this. I don't like that line. There we go. So, as you can see, we can have two people working on the texture, or one person working on the texture and one person rigging during the exact same time. And this is useful to know. For example, you hire a 3D artist in order to make a really awesome model for you. The model gets created, and it's back in your hands to okay it. That same artist can also texture it, hopefully. I mean, he should be able to if he's an artist. And you, wanting to save time because you're going to be releasing in a month, send that model off to be rigged. After it's done rigging, you send it off to your contract animator, and he makes the cycles for you. Around this time, you get the textures back to okay. You agree with them, and you share those textures with the animator, who can then use them to make sure that if there is any texture stretching, everyone knows about it. And at that point, the textures can go back to your original artist and say, hey, there's some stretching here, and you can even give him back an animation cycle so he can see where it is. Remember, since the art pipeline is a collaborative process, a lot of these people talk to each other. And if you're working with contract artists who, for some weird reason or another, and have gotten the idea that they should never talk to anyone and need to be completely left out and alone and in the dark, sometimes you might need to help them with this process by explaining to them, hey, it's going to be stretched this way, so don't worry about detail under the arm. Or, hey, we're not worried about text on the shirt because the way the character's animated, he's going to be hunched over all the time. So now that you know this process, you have a general idea of how some things can be done at the same time, and hopefully this will save you time. And time, of course, is money. Now, which parts can be done later in the stages, or thrown around a little bit, and which ones can be redone? Well, the easy answer is all of it. If near the end you look at a model and you're not happy with the animation, the textures, or the silhouette of the model, or the model itself, you can still change any of those. Now, let me explain. And I'll go through each one individually. You're looking at your model in game, and you realize it's lower poly than everything else in your environment. You know, when we were talking about pixel and poly density. So, we need to add detail to it. Will that change the UVs or the texture? A lot of modeling packages nowadays have this option to preserve UV space, and that means if you were to extrude polygons from your model, it's going to make sure the UVs stay the same on the model. And the new UVs that are created are going to be created off of the UV space that's already unfolded. Now, what does this mean? Well, quite simply, if you have a polygonal face, well, let's say this is one quad, and then you select that face, and then you extrude it inwards to make another quad inside, your UVs should look like this. And if they don't, you can quickly go to the UVs, select that, and just unwrap. And these UVs, if they're using this as an anchor point, which you can do by selecting the vertices in a 3D window, should shrink down to size. Is it a little bit extra work? Sure, but if you're changing things if you're changing things on the final model, it's going to require a little work anyways. And this isn't that much, honestly. Now, texture. Let's say this was the character's cheek. Well, if it's the cheek, no additional detail needs to be added. There is already color there. If you added something off of the actual texture and you want more detail there, it should be easy enough to paint and shouldn't be a major problem. Now, if you change so much detail that the entire model needs to be re-unwrapped, or the UVs were horrible, you can still do that. There's a couple tools, some of them actually exist in Maya, where you can rebake an existing texture to a new model. This is kind of like a normal mapping process, where you take one model and you say this is going to be the source mesh, or this is going to be the reference mesh, and the other one's going to be the source. And it will take all the color information from one model and bake it into the color information of another model into a new map. And it's a similar process to how you would make occlusion maps or normal maps in Maya, and I'm sure it's the same for Max. Again, you can change the texture, since it is actually at the end of your art pipeline, anytime you really want. Now, can you add bones or remove bones in the process? For example, let's say there were 2 mini bones, and someone wasn't watching, and it got to the end, and you realize there's all these extra bones you don't need. Yeah, let's say if they're in the face. You could easily delete those bones and rebind the mesh, and unless those bones were animated specifically, you don't have to worry about it. The rig will generally control certain bones and rotations, and as long as you watch out and not delete those, you don't really have to worry too much. But if you do, those will have to be reanimated. Now, back to modeling. If you add additional details, sometimes, depending on what modeling package you have, it will reorder the vertices, especially if you delete, your history or something else. And that might actually require you to rebind the mesh. In other words, paint weights over again. And that's a really annoying process, so I just wanted to give you a warning on that. But you shouldn't have to reanimate. Now again, since animation is at the end of an art pipeline, you can change things at the end. But I got to give you a warning, and this is where it differs from the entertainment or cartoon or video industry. And that's because, if you don't know, animation cycles for games have to be logged into your engine. So you might say the walk cycle is between 25 and 36 frames of your animation file, and that the idle animations are 0 through 24. Well, if you change the idle animations to 0 through 27, and you don't remember that you have to modify the frames for the walk cycle, your walk cycle, every time your character walks, is going to start off with the last 2 frames of your idle animation. And that's going to look bad. So be sure to watch out for that. Just understand that even though you're animating the model in Maya and everything looks fantastic in Maya, you might still have some issues in Engine if you don't make sure to check this out. And if you're lucky, you might actually already have a tool that does this automatically for you, or at least makes it to where you're forced to do it for yourself. But if not, such as if you're using an engine where you actually have to write out in a script or a log file exactly what the animated frames are, you need to make sure to do this, because if you don't, it's going to look bad. So that's everything going to be changed in an efficient order it can be made in. So hopefully you all understand the art pipeline a little bit clearer now. And just remember, let's see. No, I think I pretty much said everything. We got models, UV, texture, rigging, animation, concept, and then the magical final leap to final, which is usually, an okay by a lead. It will usually go through, I guess, someone on the production team, and then QA. It's kind of like the final check for everything. Because even though it will be in game, they're going to be the ones looking at the model over and over again and being like, yeah, there's a graphics corruption on the lower left leg, and honestly that just means texture stretching probably. But they'll be the ones to catch any problems you have. So, thank you, and in the next episode we should be going over texturing. Unless I forget something in the concepts here. Oh well. Thank you.